Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the weekly reading stream. Continuing this COVID-19 The Great Reset, um, as usual. It's almost halfway through it. We will see how I go. um, so I will. Oh, have to this so if I can see the stream on my phone going ahead. Okay, roll a cigarette. Sorry, it started. Um, so I think I mentioned this after, like, sort of at the end of last week's stream reading this book. But I've noticed it is it's a lot more inoffensive than I would have thought. Um, like I mean, it really is just it is just kind of relatively inoffensive. It just seems to be an analysis more than any kind of manifesto. Um, then again, I think there is some stuff in there, although I had to look up after the stream. I think the actual manifesto from Klaus Schwab, the chairman of the World Economic Forum, would be his book titled Stakeholder Capitalism, which is I just think it even says on the back of this, it says, yeah, a lifelong advocate of quote unquote stakeholder capitalism. Maybe I will have to put that on the list to read at some point. Um, that may be that may end up being more important than this. Truthfully, I am not 100% certain on that. But I mean, to a significant degree, reading this book, I have not actually read anything that is particularly objectionable. Um, Outside of like strict like anti-capitalist grounds. Um, but like broadly, it really just seems like a kind of analysis. I think his book Stakeholder Capitalism would be the manifesto of sorts. But next, like after I have finished reading this book, the next book I will read will be Vladimir Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. So getting to some actual Marxist theory rather than this. So that is probably going to be a thing where I will try to actually go through and read some actual sort of theory books. I would love to particularly read stuff that I haven't read yet. Stuff that's probably lower on my priority list to read on my own. That way I sort of read bits and pieces as I go. But yeah, so I am going to start reading. So this is going to be COVID-19, The Great Reset, Chapter 1, Part 6. 6 streams reading Chapter 1. I think you can see how long it is. But yeah, so last time... So 1.5 environmental reset. Yeah. Okay. Let's see where it goes. Right, let's begin. Environmental reset. At first glance, the pandemic and the environment might seem to be only distantly related cousins, but they are much closer and more intertwined than we think. Both have and will continue to interact in unpredictable and distinctive ways, ranging from the part played by diminished biodiversity in the behavior of infectious diseases to the effect that COVID-19 might have on climate change, thus illustrating the perilously subtle balance and complex interactions between humankind and nature. Furthermore, in global risk terms, it is with climate change and ecosystem collapse, the two key environmental risks, that the pandemic most easily equates. The three represent, by nature and to varying degrees, existential threats to humankind. And we could argue that COVID-19 has already given us a glimpse, or foretaste, of what a full-fledged climate crisis and ecosystem collapse could entail from an economic perspective. Combined demand and supply shocks, and disruption to trade and supply chains with ripple and knock-on effects that amplify risks, and in some cases opportunities, in the other macro categories: geopolitics, societal issues, and technology. If climate change, ecosystem collapse, and pandemics look so similar as global risks, how do they really compare? They possess many common attributes while displaying strong dissimilarities. The 5 main shared attributes are: 1. They are known, i.e., white swan systemic risks that propagate very fast in our interconnected world, and in so doing, amplify other risks from different categories. 2. They are nonlinear, meaning that beyond a certain threshold or tipping point, they can exercise catastrophic effects, like super spreading in a particular location and then overwhelming the capabilities of the health system in the case of the pandemic. 3. The probabilities and distribution of their impacts are very hard, if not impossible, to measure. They are constantly shifting and having to be reconsidered under revised assumptions, which in turn makes them extremely difficult to manage from a policy perspective. 4. They are global in nature and therefore can only be properly addressed in a globally coordinated fashion. And 5. They affect disproportionately the already most vulnerable countries and segments of the population. And what are their dissimilarities? There are several, most of which are of a conceptual and methodological nature, like a pandemic being a contagion risk, while climate change and ecosystem collapse are accumulation risks. But the two that matter the most are 1. The time horizon difference. It has a critical bearing on policies and mitigating actions. And 2. The causality problem. It makes public acceptance of mitigation strategies more difficult. One, pandemics are a quasi-instantaneous risk whose imminence and danger are visible to all. An outbreak threatens our survival as individuals or a species, and we therefore respond immediately and with determination when faced with the risk. By contrast, climate change and nature loss are gradual and cumulative, with effects that are discernible mostly in the medium and long term. And despite more and more climate-related and exceptional nature loss events, there are still significant numbers who remain unconvinced of the immediacy of the climate crisis. This crucial difference between the respective time horizons of a pandemic and that of climate change and nature loss means that a pandemic risk requires immediate action that will be followed by a rapid result, while climate change and nature loss also require immediate action, but the result, or future reward in the jargon of economists, will only follow with a certain time lag. Mike Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, who is now the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, has observed that this problem of time asynchronicity generates a tragedy of the horizon. Contrary to immediate and observable risks, climate change risks may seem distant in terms of time and geography, in which case they will not be responded to with the gravity they deserve or demand. As an example, the material risk that global warming and rising waters pose for a physical asset, like a beachside holiday resort or a company, like a hotel group, will not necessarily be considered as material by investors and will therefore not be priced in by markets. Two, the causality problem is easy to grasp, as are the reasons that make respective policies so much more difficult to implement. In the case of the pandemic, the causation link between the virus and the disease is obvious. SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19. Apart from a handful of conspiracy theorists, nobody will dispute that. In the case of environmental risks, it is much more difficult to attribute direct causality to a specific event. Often scientists cannot point to a direct link of causation between climate change and a specific weather event, like a drought or the severity of a hurricane. Similarly, they don't always agree about how a specific human activity affects particular species facing extinction. This makes it incredibly more difficult to mitigate climate change and nature loss risks. While for a pandemic, the majority of citizens will tend to agree with the necessity to impose coercive measures, they will resist constraining policies in the case of environmental risks where the evidence can be disputed. A more fundamental reason also exists. Fighting a pandemic does not require a substantial change of the underlying socioeconomic model and of our consumption habits. Fighting environmental risks does. Fighting a pandemic does not require a substantial change of the underlying socioeconomic model and of our consumption habits. Fighting environmental risks does. No fucking shit, Sherlock. It's your system that's fucking doing this to us. No fucking shit. No fucking shit. Oh my god. You really just said that. You really just. Goes without saying, folks, the necessity of communism confirmed. Fuck me. Oh my fucking god. Oh my god. Oh, I gotta take a fucking photo of that. Jesus. Oh my god, man. What the fuck? Oh, I fucking love that. I fucking love that. I can't believe fucking. Oh my god, man. What the fuck? Oh my god, what the fuck? Oh god. Of course you would object. Oh no, I'm talking about stakeholder capitalism. I gotta fucking read that. I I feel like I've got to read that. I got to keep going down this fucking rabbit hole. I got to keep going down that rabbit hole. I have to figure out why the fuck are people calling it communism? Why the fuck are people calling it communism? I mean, when you say shit like this, you fucking. Why you fucking. Oh, I gotta post this in a server. Fucking heck. Oh my god, man. What the fuck? What the fuck? Oh, what the fuck? Oh my god. Oh my god, man. Wow. My god, man. What the actual fuck? I'm sorry. That should not be making me laugh as much as it has. Oh my fucking god. Oh, okay, let's keep reading. Fuck me. 1.5.1 Coronavirus and the environment. Nature and zoonotic diseases. Oh boy, this will be interesting. Zoonotic diseases are those that spread from animals to humans. Most experts and conservationists agree that they have drastically increased in recent years, particularly because of deforestation, a phenomenon also linked to an increase in carbon dioxide emissions, which augments the risk of close human animal interaction and contamination. For many years, researchers thought that natural environments like tropical forests and their rich wildlife represented a threat to humans because this is where the pathogens and viruses at the origin of new diseases in humans, such as dengue, Ebola, and HIV, could be found. Today, we know this is wrong because the causation goes the other way. As David Quammen, author of Spillover Animal Infections and the Next Human Pandemic, argues, we invade tropical forests and other wild landscapes, which harbor so many species of animals and plants, and within those creatures, so many unknown viruses. We cut the trees, we kill the animals or cage them and send them to markets. We disrupt ecosystems and we shake viruses loose from their natural hosts. When that happens, they need a new host. Often, we are it. By now, an increasing number of scientists have shown that it is, in fact, the destruction of biodiversity caused by humans that is the source of new viruses like COVID 19. These researchers have coalesced around the new discipline of planetary health that studies the subtle and complex connections that exist between the well being of humans, other living species, and entire ecosystems. And their findings have made it clear that, that the destruction of biodiversity will increase the number of pandemics. In a recent letter to the US Congress, 100 wildlife and environmental groups estimate that zoonotic diseases have quadrupled over the past 50 years. Since 1970, land use changes have had the largest relative negative impact on nature and in the process caused a quarter of man-made emissions. Agriculture alone covers more than 1/3 of the terrestrial land surface and is the economic activity that disrupts nature the most. I'll get back to this in a moment. A recent academic review concludes that agriculture drivers are associated with more than 50% of zoonotic diseases. As human activities like agriculture, with many others like mining, logging, or tourism, encroach on natural ecosystems, they break down barriers between human populations and animals, creating the conditions for infectious diseases to emerge by spilling from animals to humans. The loss of animals' natural habitat and the wildlife trade are particularly relevant because when animals known as being linked to particular diseases, like bats and pangolins with the coronavirus, are taken out of the wild and moved into cities, a wildlife disease reservoir is simply transported into a densely populated area. This is what might have happened at the market in Wuhan, where the novel coronavirus is believed to have originated. The Chinese authorities have since permanently banned wildlife trade and consumption. Didn't know that. Learn something new every day, I guess. Smart though, if I'm being honest. Nowadays, most scientists would agree that the greater population growth is, the more we disturb the environment, the more intensive farming becomes without adequate biosecurity, the higher the risk of new epidemics. The key antidote currently available to us to contain the progression of zoonotic diseases is the respect and preservation of the natural environment and the active protection of biodiversity. To do this effectively, it will be incumbent on us all to rethink our relationship with nature and question why we have become so alienated from it. In the concluding chapter, we offer specific recommendations on the form that a nature-friendly recovery may take. Why we have become so alienated from it. Again, the answer is capitalism. Again, the answer is fucking capitalism. So, the greater population growth is. Why does that seem like Malthusianism waiting to happen? Sus as fuck. So, I should point out, in the concluding chapter, we offer specific recommendations on the form that a nature-friendly recovery may take. The answer is the abolition of capitalism. That's the answer. That's the only answer. Oh. I feel like this is really driving me more crazy now because he's exactly right. But, like, I mean, he's exactly right in so many ways, but. Oh. Oh. Let's continue. Air pollution and pandemic risk. It's been known for years that air pollution, largely caused by emissions that also contribute to global warming, is a silent killer linked to various health conditions ranging from diabetes and cancer to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. According to the World Health Organization, 90% of the world's population breathes air that fails to meet safety guidelines, causing the premature death of 7 million people each year and prompting the organization to qualify air pollution as a public health emergency. We now know that air pollution worsens the impact of any particular coronavirus, not only the current SARS-CoV-2, on our health. As early as 2003, a study published in the midst of the SARS epidemic suggested that air pollution might explain the variation in the level of lethality, making it clear for the first time that the greater the level of air pollution, the greater the likelihood of death from the disease caused by a coronavirus. Mm. Yeah, right. Since then, a growing body of research has shown how a lifetime of breathing dirtier air can make people more susceptible to the coronavirus. In the US, a recent medical paper concluded that those regions with more polluted air will experience higher risks of death from COVID 19, showing that US counties with higher pollution levels will suffer higher numbers of hospitalizations and numbers of deaths. A consensus has formed in the medical and public community that there is a synergistic effect between air pollution exposure and the possible occurrence of COVID 19, and a worse outcome when the virus does strike. The research, still embryonic but expanding fast, hasn't proved yet that a link of causation exists, but it unambiguously exposes a strong correlation between air pollution and the spread of the coronavirus and its severity. It seems that air pollution in general, and the concentration of particulate matter in particular, impair the airways, the lungs' first line of defense, meaning that people, irrespective of their age, who live in highly polluted cities will face a greater risk of catching COVID 19 and dying from it. This may explain why people in Lombardy, one of Europe's most polluted regions, who had contracted the virus were shown to be twice as likely to die from COVID 19 than people almost anywhere else in Italy. Interesting. I might need to look into that. That's very interesting. That higher air pollution levels worsened the chances of death. That's crazy. Wow. That is pretty nuts. Yeah, right. Hmm. Lockdown and carbon emissions. It is too early to define the amount by which global carbon dioxide emissions will fall in 2020, but the International Energy Agency (IEA) estimates in its Global Energy Review 2020 that they will fall by 8%. Even though this figure would correspond to the largest annual reduction on record, it is still minuscule compared to the size of the problem, and it remains inferior to the annual reduction in emissions of 7.6% over the next decade that the UN thinks is necessary to hold the global rise in temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Considering the severity of the lockdowns, the 8% figure looks rather disappointing. It seems to suggest that small individual actions, consuming much less, not using our cars, and not flying, are of little significance when compared to the size of emissions generated by electricity, agriculture, and industry. The big ticket emitters that continued to operate during the lockdowns, with the partial exception of some industries. Personal climate offsets debunked. That whole shit, like, oh, you just have to offset your emissions by donating to a charity that's planting trees somewhere. Or you just need to not use your car as much. Or you just need to, what else? Eat less. Don't fly a plane. That alone, that is like fucking, like, one sentence rips apart the entire notion of the whole idea that it's like, oh, we need to offset. We need to offset or we need to change our own lifestyles. Obviously it's fucking industry. I mean, well, it's yeah, wow. What it also reveals is that the biggest offenders in terms of carbon emissions aren't always those often perceived as the obvious culprits. A recent sustainability report shows that the total carbon emissions generated by the electricity production required to power our electronic devices and transmit their data is roughly equivalent to that of the global airline industry. Okay. The conclusion: even unprecedented and draconian, got that right, lockdowns, with a third of the world population confined to their homes for more than a month, came nowhere near to being a viable decarbonization strategy because, even so, the world economy kept emitting large amounts of carbon dioxide. What then might such a strategy look like? The considerable size and scope of the challenge can only be addressed by a combination of 1. A radical and major systemic change in how we produce the energy we need to function, and 2. Structural changes in our consumption behavior. If, in the post pandemic era, we decide to resume our lives just as before, by driving the same cars, by flying to the same destinations, by eating the same things, by heating our house the same way, and so on, the COVID-19 crisis will have gone to waste as far as climate policies are concerned. Conversely, if some of the habits we were forced to adopt during the pandemic translate into structural changes in behavior, the climate outcome might be different. Commuting less, working remotely a bit more, bicycling and walking instead of driving to keep the air of our cities as clean as it was during the lockdowns, vacationing nearer to home, all these, if aggregated at scale, could lead to a sustained reduction in carbon emissions. This brings us to the all-important question of whether the pandemic will eventually exercise a positive or negative effect on climate change policies. Okay. Let's see how much of this is left. I'll have a smoke and then I can finish the environmental reset chapter. And then next week head on to what technological reset. I think the next bit is. What I've been reading tonight has been very enlightening so far. It's more enlightening. Like I'm actually kind of learning some things. I think. Whereas previously I was kind of just like nodding along, going like, yeah, 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 no shit, Sherlock. A correlation between air pollution and the severity of the pandemic. That one was very enlightening. Very, honestly. Although I will have to read this stakeholder capitalism. I'll have to read it. I think I'm too intrigued about the solutions he believes will make the world a better place. And I don't know. I mean, I stand by the notion that the only real solution is the abolition of capitalism. The establishment of direct democracy, the establishment of a democratic economic plan for sustainable development, for sustainable um, development of productive forces, the abolition of wage labor, commodity production, all of that kind of stuff. I am a communist. That so, but very enlightening. And I mean, I think there was a bit there where it mentioned like how like agriculture and like, and the first thing that popped in my mind as I was going through that was permaculture. Like I have taken an avid interest in permaculture recently because in a way, at least with regards to a lot of crops, I've heard not so much with staple crops like wheat or rice or things like that. But with regards to like non-staple crops, permaculture could be the solution to a lot of the negative environmental effects of the agriculture industry. Um, I think that's why that's really been the way I've been leading. So, Hmm. Didn't go very far. Hmm. We're gonna make a shopping list after I've done this. Need to figure out some things to cook over the um over the next 2 weeks. Payday tomorrow. Pretty typical. Go shopping, I am going to start building my first garden. I am yet to begin learning all the ins and outs of permaculture. But as I do that, I will start to try and transition things over a bit. Um, and I'm always thinking of doing some like vine stuff, like some vertical farming in there as well. Just to get like one thing for now. I was given an idea for like growing potatoes. Growing potatoes that'd be good because then I can make my own fries. Make my own fries, or I can make my own mash. I wonder how you make gravy. Nourishing gravy. See if I can make that myself. That'd be. I'm gonna look that up. Um, Homemade gravy. I mean, stock cubes. I mean, I can't just make stock cubes. Gravy with with ingredients that can be grown at home. Okay. Huh. Alright, so I can make my own vegetable stock? Huh. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Home produced milk. Can't. It's like I can figure out how to make vegan milk or something. That would. So I don't have a cow. Fucking cow. Oh, really done this, then I'll get back to reading. Sorry, almost like always in between sections, just having a bit of a fucking um having a little bit of fun. Would be interesting. Grow my own potatoes, grow my own ingredients, make like a vegan gravy using like, I don't know, almond milk or something if I can grow almonds. I should genuinely look up some possible recipes. Like, look up some possible recipes that I could make based solely on the kinds of, like, solely vegan recipes based on ingredients I can grow here. I think that'd be pretty cool. I think that'd be pretty cool. So, I want to grow some bush tucker in there as well. Bush tucker being basically like native Australian plants, or edible plants. Um, so stuff that doesn't include the stuff that was sort of brought in to be grown um, from colonization onward, stuff that was plants that were already here. Um, so maybe I should grow one of those trees, get some witchetty grubs. I feel like I would not want to touch them though. Alright, I'm just gonna keep reading. Okay. 1.5.2 Impact of the pandemic on climate change and other environmental policies. The pandemic is destined to dominate the policy landscape for years, with the serious risk that it could overshadow environmental concerns. In a telling anecdote, the convention centre in Glasgow, where the UN COP26 climate summit should have taken place in November 2020, was converted in April into a hospital for COVID-19 patients. Already, climate negotiations have been delayed and policy initiatives postponed, nourishing the narrative that, for a long while, governmental leaders will only be paying attention to the multifaceted range of immediate problems created by the pandemic crisis. Another narrative has also emerged, elaborated by some national leaders, senior business executives, and prominent opinion makers. It runs along these lines that the COVID-19 crisis cannot go to waste and that now is the time to enact sustainable environmental policies. In reality, what happens with the fight against climate change in the post-pandemic era could go in two opposite directions. The first corresponds to the narrative above. The economic consequences of the pandemic are so painful, difficult to address, and complex to implement that most governments around the world may decide to temporarily put aside concerns about global warming to focus on the economic recovery. If such is the case, policy decisions support and stimulate fossil fuel heavy and carbon emitting industries by subsidizing them. They will also roll back stringent environmental standards seen as a stumbling block on the road to rapid economic recovery and will encourage companies and consumers to produce and consume as much stuff as possible. The second is spurred by a different narrative in which businesses and governments are emboldened by a new social conscience among large segments of the global population that life can be different, and is pushed by activists. The moment must be seized to take advantage of this unique window of opportunity to redesign a more sustainable economy for the greater good of our societies. Let's examine both divergent possible outcomes in more detail. Needless to say, they are country and region dependent. He puts EU in brackets there after region. No two countries will adopt the same policies nor move at the same speed, but ultimately they should all embrace the direction of the less carbon-intensive trend. Three key reasons could explain why this is not a given, and why the focus on the environment could fade when the pandemic starts retreating. Governments could decide that it is in the best collective interest to pursue growth at any cost in order to cushion the impact on unemployment. 2. Companies will be under such pressure to increase revenues that sustainability in general and climate considerations in particular will become secondary. 3. Low oil prices, if sustained, which is likely, could encourage both consumers and businesses to rely even more on carbon-intensive energy. These three reasons are cogent enough to make them compelling, but there are others that might just succeed in pushing the trend in the other direction. 4 in particular could succeed in making the world cleaner and more sustainable. 1. Enlightened leadership. Some leaders and decision makers who are already at the forefront of the fight against climate change may want to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the pandemic to implement long-lasting and wider environmental changes. They will, in effect, make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste. The exhortation of different leaders ranging from HRH, the Prince of Wales, to Andrew Cuomo to build it back better goes in that direction. So does a dual declaration made by the IEA with Dan Jorgensen, Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities of Denmark, suggesting that clean energy transitions could help kickstart economies. Around the world, leaders are getting ready now, drawing up massive economic stimulus packages. Some of these plans will provide short-term boosts. Others will shape infrastructure for decades to come. We believe that by making clean energy an integral part of their plans, governments can deliver jobs and economic growth while also ensuring that their energy systems are modernized, more resilient, and less polluting. Governments led by enlightened leaders will make their stimulus packages conditional upon green commitments. They will, for example, provide more generous financial conditions for companies with low-carbon business models. 2. Risk awareness. The pandemic played the role of a great risk awakening, making us much more aware of the risks we collectively face and reminding us that our world is tightly interconnected. COVID-19 made it clear that we ignore science and expertise at our peril, and that the consequences of our collective actions can be considerable. Hopefully, some of these lessons that offer us a better understanding of what an existential risk really means and entails will now be transferred to climate risks. As Nicholas Stern, chair of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment, stated, "What we have seen from all of this is that we can make changes. We have to recognize there will be other pandemics and be better prepared. But we must also recognize that climate change is a deeper and bigger threat that doesn't go away and is just as urgent." Having worried for months about the pandemic and its effect on our lungs, we'll become obsessed about clean air. During the lockdowns, a significant number of us saw and smelled for ourselves the benefits of reduced air pollution, possibly prompting a collective realization that we just have a few years to address the worst consequences of global warming and climate change. If this is the case, societal, collective and individual changes will follow. 3. Change in behavior. As a consequence of the point above, societal attitudes and demands may evolve towards greater sustainability to a greater degree than commonly assumed. Our consumption patterns changed dramatically during the lockdowns by forcing us to focus on the essential and giving us no choice but to adopt greener living. This may last, prompting us to disregard everything that we do not really need and putting into motion a virtuous cycle for the environment. Likewise, we may decide that working from home, when possible, is good for both the environment and our individual well-being. Commuting is a destroyer of well-being. The longer it is, the more detrimental it becomes to our physical and mental health. These structural changes in how we work, consume, and invest may take a little while before they become widespread enough to make a real difference. But, as we argued before, what matters is the direction and the strength of the trend. The poet and philosopher Lao Tzu was right in saying, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." We are just at the beginning of a long and painful recovery, and for many of us, thinking about sustainability may seem like a luxury. But when things start to improve, we'll collectively remember that a relation of causality exists between air pollution and COVID-19. Then sustainability will cease to be secondary, and climate change, so closely correlated with air pollution, will move to the forefront of our preoccupations. What social scientists call behavioral contagion, the way in which attitudes, ideas, and behavior spread throughout the population, might then work its magic. Activism. Some analysts ventured that the pandemic would provoke the obsolescence of activism, but the exact opposite may well prove to be true. According to a group of American and European academics, the coronavirus has emboldened the motivation for change and triggered new tools and strategies in terms of social activism. Over the course of just several weeks, this group of researchers collected data on various forms of social activism and identified almost 100 distinct methods of nonviolent action, including physical, virtual, and hybrid actions. Their conclusion: emergencies often prove to be the forge in which new ideas and opportunities are hammered out. While it is impossible to predict what the long-term effects of such growing skill and awareness may be, it's clear that people power has not diminished. Instead, movements around the world are adapting to remote organizing, building their bases, sharpening their messaging, and planning strategies for what comes next. If their assessment is correct, social activism, repressed by necessity during the lockdowns, and their various measures of physical and social distancing, may re-emerge with renewed vigor once the periods of confinement are over. Emboldened by what they saw during the lockdowns, no air pollution, climate activists will redouble their efforts, imposing further pressure on companies and investors. As we will see in Chapter 2, investors' activism will also be a force to be reckoned with. It will strengthen the cause of social activists by adding an extra and powerful dimension to it. Let's imagine the following situation to illustrate the point. A group of green activists could demonstrate in front of a coal-fired power plant to demand greater enforcement of pollution regulations, while a group of investors does the same in the boardroom by depriving the plant access to capital. Across the four reasons, scattered factual evidence gives us hope that the green trend will eventually prevail. It comes from different domains, but converges towards the conclusion that the future could be greener than we commonly assume. To corroborate this conviction, four observations intersect with the four reasons provided. In June 2020, BP, one of the world's oil and gas super majors slashed the value of its assets by 17.5 billion, having come to the conclusion that the pandemic will accelerate a global shift towards cleaner forms of energy. Other energy companies are about to make a similar move. In the same spirit, major global companies like Microsoft have committed to becoming carbon negative by 2030. The European Green Deal, launched by the European Commission, is a massive endeavour and the most tangible manifestation yet of public authorities deciding not to let the COVID-19 crisis go to waste. The plan commits €1 trillion for lowering emissions and investing in the circular economy, with the aim of making the EU the first carbon-neutral continent by 2050 in terms of net emissions, and decoupling economic growth from resource use. 3. Various international surveys show that a large majority of citizens around the world want the economic recovery from the coronavirus to prioritize climate change. In the countries that comprise the G20, a sizable majority of 65% of citizens support a green recovery. 4. Some cities, like Seoul, are furthering their commitment to climate and environment policies by implementing their own Green New Deal, framed as one way to mitigate the pandemic fallout. The direction of the trend is clear, but ultimately, systemic change will come from policymakers and business leaders willing to take advantage of COVID stimulus packages to kickstart the nature-positive economy. This will not only be about public investments. The key to crowding private capital into new sources of nature-positive economic value will be to shift key policy levers and public finance incentives as part of a wider economic reset. There is a strong case for acting more forcefully on spatial planning and land use regulations, public finance and subsidy reform, innovation policies that help to drive expansion and deployment in addition to R&D, blended finance, and better measurement of natural capital as a key economic asset. Many governments are starting to act, but much more is needed to tip the system towards a nature-positive new norm and make a majority of people all over the world realize this is not only an imperious necessity, but also a considerable opportunity. A policy paper prepared by Systemic, ending with a Q, in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, estimates that building the nature-positive economy could represent more than $10 trillion per year by 2030 in terms of new economic opportunities as well as avoided economic costs. In the short term, deploying around $250 billion of stimulus funding could generate up to 37 million nature-positive jobs in a highly cost-effective manner. Resetting the environment should not be seen as a cost, rather as an investment that will generate economic activity and employment opportunities. Hopefully, the threat from COVID-19 won't last. One day it will be behind us. By contrast, the threat from climate change and its associated extreme weather events will be with us for the foreseeable future and beyond. The climate risk is unfolding more slowly than the pandemic did, but it will have even more severe consequences. To a great extent, its severity will depend on the policy response to the pandemic. Every measure destined to revive economic activity will have an immediate effect on how we live, but will also have an impact on carbon emissions that will in turn have an environmental impact across the globe and measured across generations. As we've argued in this book, these choices are ours to make. So the technological reset section, which will be the last section, I will read next week. Depending on how long it takes, it may take over 2 hours. But that will be the last section of chapter 1. So chapter 1, part 7, and then chapter 2, part 1, finally. So it's a bit early, but I do have stuff to do. So that's a good opportunity to end it here. So yeah, getting over halfway through it now. So I will be doing my gaming stream on Thursday. I will continue playing Assassin's Creed Origins. I still have not had a chance to go back into Workers and Resources Soviet Republic to try and figure out the trades. If I do, I do. Otherwise, Assassin's Creed Origins. So yeah, we will I'll be back for that on Thursday. Otherwise, finish chapter 1 of COVID-19 The Great Reset next Tuesday. So until then, I'll see you guys either on Thursday or next Tuesday. Have a good night. Or morning if you're in another place in the world. If you're in Australia, have a good night.